right, hello everybody, welcome. Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful Saturday. My name is Suzanne Perry, and I'm on the board of Humanists MN, and I'm really excited to be introducing this discussion on humanism and Stoicism, relevant philosophies for modern freethinkers. We have some experts here who will compare these schools of thought and show how they deal with life's questions. Humanists MN is sponsoring this event with Minnesota Stoics and First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. So I'm pleased to welcome those of you who are here attending from those two groups. And a special shout out to Rebecca Chesson, who's a member of both Humanists MN and Minnesota Stoics. I was bugging her for a while to write for our newsletter about Stoicism, tell us what it was all about, and instead she put together this fantastic panel today. As a humanist, I'm eager to learn more about Stoicism. We often say that many people are humanists without knowing it. Maybe the humanists in this audience will discover they are Stoics at heart, and the Stoics in the audience will discover the reverse. In any case, the more we learn about our common values, the better we can unite to help create a more rational and ethical world. Before I introduce the panel, just one housekeeping announcement. After the discussion concludes, we're all going to head out to the lobby and have some snacks and drinks, so I hope you'll join us. Now, I'll introduce the panel for this friendly face-off. In the humanist corner, Audrey Kingstrom, program coordinator and past president of Humanists MN. In the Stoics corner, we have Gabriel Blott, an organizer of Minnesota Stoics. And the referee, or moderator, is the Reverend Dr. David Breeden, senior minister at First Unitarian Society. David, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much. Well, and I understand we had some COVID last-minute problems, so oops, but that's what happens these days. Thanks for joining us today and being here. And I will be the moderator. We do have our timers back there that I will be watching. Yay, timer! And so that we don't have a 45-minute monologue, and then we're done. So I'll be watching that as well as I can. I do want to introduce the idea here. The concept of humanism in the Western context dates back to the late Middle Ages and the rediscovery of Greek and Roman philosophical and literary texts. Scholars discovered in the ancient texts a conception very different from Christianity concerning the purpose of human life and what a good life means. Some Europeans began to ask questions. Might Christian theology be wrong about human nature and the nature of being human? Those who read these classical texts, and of course they were the educated small amount of people in the Middle Ages, but those who were reading the classical texts began to call themselves humanists, and the consideration of the arts and thoughts of people, rather than thinking that everything needed to go toward God, began to lead to something that nowadays we call the humanities. In his epic poem De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, the ancient Roman poet Lucretius wrote from his perspective as a follower of Epicurus. As you know, this is one of the central rediscovery texts, and he wrote this. When to all eyes men's life lay foully crushed throughout the land beneath the heavy burden of religion, who, from heavenly regions would show her head, menacing mortal men with her hideous face. A Greek man was the first who dared raise his mortal eyes against her religion. The first one to oppose her, undeterred by stories of the gods, by lightning strikes or menacing rumbles from the heavens. Instead, with even greater eagerness, he roused his spirit's keen intelligence to answer his desire to be the first to break the narrow bolts of nature's doors, end quote. And Lucretius there is not pulling any punches about what he thinks of the religion of his Roman Empire days, foully crushed throughout the land beneath the heavy burden of religion. And yes, some Catholic, Roman Catholic trained clerics could read that and said, that's interesting. That striving became the spirit of humanism when dogma held sway throughout the Christian world. The human desire to be the first, to break the narrow bolts of nature's doors, as Lucretius said, became the ambition of the Renaissance, then the Reformation, and then the Enlightenment. It led, yes, to European colonialism, but also to the revolutions that freed colonies from European exploitation and Christian hegemony. It led Romantic poets of the 19th century to write of Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods, you may recall. It led to explorations of human hubris with the legend of Dr. Faustus that came up during the Renaissance in plays, and then Goethe's Faust in the Romantic era. First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the institution that's hosting this today, is central to understanding the history of humanism. John Dietrich, my predecessor as senior minister here back in 1916, and he was here until 1938, took the concept of humanism, essentially secular humanism, that had developed in Great Britain, and he was reading magazines from there, and that started developing in the mid-19th and accelerated through the early 20th century. And he reimagined that idea of humanism as a way to do religion without God in a congregation. And FUS became that agnostic, humanist, atheist, heretical, etc. congregation back in 1916. Now, Dietrich's fellow Unitarian minister, and I'm telling you some stuff that most people don't know, but we have the archives here. Dietrich's fellow Unitarian minister, Curtis Reese, was first president of the American Humanist Association. John Dietrich liked being a minister. Curtis Reese didn't like being a minister, and so he went secular as quickly as he could. And he was the first president of the AHA, a group that reimagined humanism yet again, more on the British secular model, as you humanist MN people know. And then there's Stoicism. Attacked and stamped out early in the Christian era, it almost disappeared except for an interesting fact. St. Paul, for example, was trained in Stoicism, and many of the ideas that come early into Christianity that are not available within the Jewish tradition are coming out of the Stoic tradition. But another stream also flowed all of those times as Christianity locked its hold. The ancient texts, studied by those who could read Greek and Latin, kept Stoicism alive in the Western literature and philosophy. So the spark was there for those who could read the literature and the philosophy. And now, in our rapidly secularizing world, the spark has turned now into a flame, and Stoicism is back, I would say, not merely a philosophical footnote, as it long was, but now a viable alternative to many religions and philosophies that they flow freely on the internet. So people are seeing this stuff everywhere nowadays. It's in publishing, it's in best-selling books, and of course, people are taking those things into their own lives. As happens anytime an idea becomes popular, There are sound ways of being Stoic, I would say, and there are some unsound ones, and we do want to look at that today. There are profound philosophers working in the new Stoicism today, and of course, there are also New Age charlatans working in the same field. There are those who would turn Stoicism into another self-help craze that, how those sweep America, maybe therapy, life hacks, but they don't take it as seriously as we do today. In their histories, Stoicism and Humanism share the status of outliers, of instances of free thought operating against the grain of the dominant culture. Yet, here we are, gathered to consider two philosophies concerning how to live a purposeful and virtuous life that are indeed outside of the Christian norms of Western civilization. Well, that's just a little background, and we definitely will answer any questions that you have. But we do want to start now, and we will be using the timer. I want to ask about Stoicism. What is in philosophy and theology, it's called the telos, the end. What is the outcome that you're going for in Stoicism?
Sure. Is my mic on well? Can you hear okay? Yep. Okay. So Stoicism, like many other Greek and Roman philosophies between about 500 BCE and about 200 CE, all had to do with the good life. They all had a different definition and path to get there, but they were concerned with getting to the good life. Philosophy wasn't merely an academic pursuit as it is nowadays, or just theory, but really how can this pragmatically help our lives, make them better in some tangible way. So the good life for the Stoics really include four major pieces. One, virtue, and we're going to get more into ethics shortly, but virtue in the easiest way is your character. So think of kindness, patience, compassion, understanding, these sorts of things. So part of the good life is being a good person, and that's how they characterized being a good person. Then there was also actually the sort of more feeling good. So there was elements of, to a good life would be happiness. But happiness isn't just the fleeting release of serotonin in your brain or this short-term joy, but they're looking for something a little more lasting and stable and concrete. And so it's to think more of it as contentment is what they were seeking. To have all of your desires either satiated or removed. They also felt freedom was an essential part. And this isn't freedom like the amendments here, freedom to do X, Y, Z. Rather, this is freedom for rather independence. My well-being or the good life is not reliant on outside factors, outside people, circumstances, whatever they would be. Rather, it is all within. And then lastly, the other point would be tranquility. This would be mental tranquility. And this is where it doesn't matter what is happening in your life, doesn't matter what your circumstances are, who you are, to still maintain that mental tranquility regardless of the circumstances. So as you see, the good life for the Stoics is really all internal qualities. And this might be perceived as being selfish. However, these internal qualities help us in acting out towards others with compassion and kindness by not being continually in tumultuous situations here for it. So.
Okay. Audrey.
All right. Well, I would agree with a lot of things you said, Gabriel. I think that humanists probably aspire to a lot of those things as well. I have written in here my notes, what's the goal? Living a good life in the here and now. That's a really important component, that we see this one life that we have and we want to live a good life. So what does that mean?
It means living ethically, being a good person, as the Stoics certainly want to do, and having a good moral character. I would say that humanists, though, see that as not only having a good moral character is more of an outward manifestation. So it's contributing to the well-being of everyone. It's caring for the planet. Might sound trite, but making the world a better place for everybody. There's a real commitment to the global perspective. We see ourselves as we can either help people or be unhelpful or hinder other people's well-being or their happiness or contentment, or we could make their lives miserable. We participate not only in our own lives but in the world around us, and so we have that capability to affect others' lives. We can impoverish the lives of others or enrich them. We can live lives of fatalism, like, what can I do? The world is as it is. Or we can live with commitment to human flourishing. And so those are some of the things that humanists really aspire to and see that we're working towards. But I would say that it also includes a sense of personal fulfillment, that we can find value, purpose, and meaning in this life, in the here and now. And sometimes humanism and its outcomes and outlook really is sort of juxtaposing itself against religion, especially Christianity, as humanism was expressed in the Western world, because Christianity was such a dominant force. So it's, again, we can find meaning and purpose without reference to a deity. And also I would say that what is our goal is to live an examined life, that we're living with intentionality, that we're not sleepwalking through life, just unaware of our presence and our effect on others or how we conduct our own lives. And finally, I would say there's a real tension between the personal and sort of the public, or our effect on others, and the environment and all the factors of our own that affect our own lives and being. But there is a sense within humanism that we can be authors of our own lives, that we can live authentically and with integrity. And that word you said, that kind of freedom that you described, Gabriel, I'm not sure if you would say that would be part of that, that freedom to sort of like free to be me, or that's probably way too trite, but that sense of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as I say, Christianity through St. Paul, one of my theology professors in graduate school, David Tracy, said that Christianity is what happens when Judaism and Greek philosophy have a child, right? It's a mixture of those two, and it's not always a mixture of the best parts of those two traditions, shall we say. We know that Paul was trained as a rabbi, and we also know that he was trained in a Stoic university. So he had both of these ideas. And I think one of the dangerous things was the whole thing about hating your body, which he kind of got from Stoicism, is like, beat down this physicality of yourself. But in my understanding anyway, the Stoics didn't mean it in the same way that, beating yourself with a whip would become the idea within Christianity. We'll potentially come back to that, but I do want to get to the ethics question there, and think about this individuality versus the group idea of how we do ethics, or how, because yes, as you mentioned, one idea against Stoicism is, hey, it's all about you. taking care of yourself, and you're not out in the world. It's sort of the same complaint as Buddhism. So talk about group ethics or ethics outside of the self.
So despite the emphasis on the individual here, again, that mental tranquility, we haven't even gotten into the importance of reason and logic and examination, as you were quoting before. Okay. Your virtue is not something you practice in a vacuum. This is something that's continually with your interactions with other people. The Stoics looked at our roles, and each of those vary from person to person, from being a spouse, a parent, a child, a friend, a coworker, and then what are all the ways to exemplify our virtue through our corresponding duties. So there was never an ignoring the plight of the whole or anything, but rather through that mental tranquility we can be a better agent of change and think clearly through the problems, see them as they are, with that examination piece there. But I have to admit there's a lot of emphasis on getting your own house in order, because that's how you are the best agent to change outside. If you're just this complete wreck, it's going to be very hard to be effective in the outside world. Now, I'm not saying you have to get everything straight before you do it, but there is certainly that emphasis. You're living with you 24/7, so you better like it and be comfortable with it. So hopefully that addressed it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, we can always come back to any of these too.
All right.
So, yes, so the point about coming out of just saving yourself in humanism.
Right. Yeah, I would say it's much more saving the world, in a sense, or making the world a better place, and perhaps not as much of an emphasis, though I think, in terms of getting your own internal house in order, which I think maybe there should be more of, because I couldn't disagree with you more. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later when we talk about different practices and stuff like that, which I think is coming into humanism. Maybe Stoicism will be an example. Epicureanism has been taken up by some humanists, certainly mindfulness, a lot of humanists, and a lot of people in the Western world have been influenced by Buddhism. But in terms of sort of the humanist ethic, I would say that the ethical commitment for humanists is a universal morality. And it's upholding the dignity and worth of everyone. That's a real sense of focus. It's of course for oneself, but certainly for everyone. At the same time, while we accept everyone's individuality and that there's diversity, it's not like trying to make everybody like me or something like that. So we have an ethical commitment to human rights, and that persons are ends in themselves as opposed to a means to other people's ends, like Amazon or Facebook, that were means to their ends, the people that run those companies. The other thing that I think we need to say about humanism's understanding of ethics is that ethics are a human construction. And those of you who know me and who have heard me speak about this before, one of my favorite contemporary humanist thinkers is Philip Kitcher, who is a philosopher, a pragmatic comes out of the Dewey tradition. He says that ethics are a social technology that humans invented. Just like we have the technology of these microphones and our cell phones and computers and everything that was the project, that was the human project to figure out how we are going to live together in harmony as people. And so he calls it a social technology. And of course, this social technology has evolved over time. And there have been lots of experiments with it across the world in different cultures. Everybody kind of tried to figure out in their own way. And today, what humanism is done, the global humanist movement then, is trying to take the best across the globe and mix it all up. And so I think, and I always use this as an example, it may be a very flawed institution, but the United Nations is an example of the world trying to come together, I think, with human rights, humanistic values, how we get along on the international global stage. So if morality doesn't come from God, who does it come from? It comes from our human nature, it comes from human need, and we've learned over time as our world has grown smaller and all the interdependence is that we have to get along again on the global stage, and so we've had to enlarge our circle of care. And so the way that we think about ethics has changed over time. But we can figure this out with empathy and compassion and reason. One last thing before they shut me down here. I realize I didn't want to forget about this, is this attending to one's moral character. And I will want to hear more from you, Gabriel, about virtue. But humanists do care about attending to their moral character as well. And they're being self-aware, and that we have reflection, we're civil, that we use social and emotional intelligence, to use contemporary psychology terms, respect for others, service, altruism. Many, I think, the same, maybe these begin to fall in the category of virtues that Stoics may practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we know, I mean, the ancient Greeks are the one who opened the question of, is it right because the gods say it's right, or is it right because it's right and then the gods say it's right? So the source of morality or ethics, according to Stoics.
Oh, God.
I know, some of these are, and we also have to be careful to be unfair, because I mean, we're talking about people 2,000 years ago, also who weren't reading Scientific American this week, so.
Yeah. So there's no, if we want to get some into the physics aspects, because among the ancient Stoics, there definitely was a belief in the divine, the gods, not quite the same as like the Abrahamic traditions of personalized deities with personalities and these sorts of things. More of pantheism, I would say. So human reason, morality, they feel was this divine spark. Now, not all Stoics agree with that in the ancient times, and hardly any in the modern times. But they definitely felt, even if you take out where it came from, they look at what is always good in every situation. And they realize, like, if you want, what's some good traits that you would look for a good friend, or to be a good parent, or to be a leader, or whatever it is. Across the board, you want someone virtuous. You want someone that's using reason, and that's someone that's using morals, someone that's kind and compassionate, understanding, patient. So they feel these are important qualities no matter what you're doing, whether you're trying to enact global change or you're just trying to have a good day. Whatever it is, these are always valuable in every circumstance. That's where that comes in.
Well, I guess we really need to go there next, which is the idea of ontology. How do we know what we know? Can we say these Stoics were naturalists, or where did they think that human knowing comes from?
Well, again, the ancients certainly felt the ability to reason was this divine quality that they shared with the gods. However, again, not all of them agree with that assessment. But it was important regardless of where it may or may not come from. I think we can all recognize it's this unique trait Even if we feel animals have some ability for this, we obviously took it to a whole other level. And so this, as you said, the unexamined life, or is not worth living, which is a Socrates. So this examination, reflection, continually questioning things. The Stoics on numerous occasions said if something better comes along or new information, we will jettison it. We will change. But we haven't seen it, so we're not going to do it. So it would naturally evolve over time. Obviously, the knowledge of modern science was not around at that time, so they're going to be way off on certain aspects. But that's fine. That was the information they had. We have more information. It's going to adjust and change over time.
Okay. So basically naturalistic in the understanding of the way the world or the universe worked at that time.
Correct.
Okay. Audrey, how do humanists do that?
Well, I remember when in our pre-sessions here, Gabriel, you're talking about that Stoics follow the laws of physics, or believe in the laws of physics. You said a phrase like that. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that would be similar to humanists. We're very much naturalists in the sense we follow the laws of physics in our ways of knowing. The theory of evolution we accept. We rely on science, reason, history, experience, as well as now modern social science. We look for verifiable evidence. And I would say probably not everybody uses this word, but a lot of the more academic people who identify with naturalism and humanism would say they're pragmatists. Now, that's a whole philosophic world, philosophy itself. But simply put, what works? What works? What's demonstratable? And I think that is in line with Stoicism as I understand it as well. The other thing that humanists see themselves as an integral part of nature, and again, maybe as like that pantheistic view, we're part of the natural world and we're subject to its laws. We're not above it, we're not outside of it. There's not some kind of hierarchy like in Christianity, there's God here and then maybe the angels and then humans and, anyway. So the other thing I'd like to always talk about is the interdependent web of existence. And I think humanists didn't talk about that, people who call themselves that back in the Enlightenment, as much, but people from other traditions across the globe have really had that part of their philosophy. And I think it's really important for contemporary humanists to bring that into their philosophy and their understanding of the world. And of course now, given climate change, we see how important that characteristic is to understand our interdependence with the rest of the world. The other thing I would like to say is we don't see any body-soul duality. As naturalists, some people don't quite understand what that means. So there's no soul. No. The body, we're physicalists. This is it. And our consciousness is a product of the workings of the brain. So that when we die, we cease to exist, except in the memory of others. So essentially, humanists eschew supernaturalism and superstition and just stay in reality a very naturalistic perspective. So basically, materialist, naturalist, as best we understand that in our time. If we could take Epicurus, for example, and give him a graduate degree today, would he agree with this, or would there be a slight difference?
Well, Epicurus was Epicurean, so I'm not going to speak on...
Okay, Epictetus, the one we always get confused with.
Yes, wrong epic. So What happens after death? I'm sorry, what are you wondering? What you would think about
Would they be
here?
strict materialists if they were using the science of our day? I mean, we know that they were...
Most likely. Even the ones that did believe in some sort of divinity, and these were the places you got it, there was still a finality to death. That was one of the reasons why it's not to be feared, which the Epicureans agreed with, because you would have no consciousness, no ability to experience pain or loss or anything else. So it's not like something happened afterwards. So there was a finality that was going on there for sure.
Okay. Well, and since we're sticking with Greek theological terms, anthropos, the understanding of what it means to be human, and we definitely know that in Christianity, for example, it's to be human is to work on going to heaven, by golly, and being a good Christian. So what is the anthropos of the Stoics? Then, now, or however you want to address that.
Sure. So this is one area where I feel they were way ahead of their times for human nature. So they certainly did believe that we had this sort of animalistic side and a more rationalistic side, which both modern psychology, when it comes to system 1 versus system 2 thinking, modern neurology, sorry, I have my notes here, where was that? With the triune brain model, which often has like the reptilian brain piece. We were fighting these things. We're fighting this instinctual, primal piece, but we have this ability to reason, examine, and think, and we should obviously be fostering that part of our existence. They were also really, their human psychology, basically how do we operate, was all about our beliefs. Those beliefs can be things from what's good and bad, but as well as what's true or false, and recognizing how much these impact not only our motivations for what we're doing, but also our reactions to how things are happening. And this modern psychology has picked up as well, cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy. Both of their founders quoted the Stoics in length and recognized that we are largely driven by these factors, and that's why the Stoics often work so hard to make sure those beliefs are proper or right, if you will, about things that are factually true or false, as well as things how you gauge things good and bad, because they have a very large and real impact on how you interact with the world. It's not just, well, you think this, I think this, and it'll impact it a lot. Mm-hmm. And it will definitely have major effects on your equanimity, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So before I talk about that, I want some clarification here. Mm-hmm. So how do the Stoics know right from wrong or good from bad? What determines that?
You're talking simply in a moral sense, not what's factually true,
right,
or what's
right, in a moral sense.
Yeah,
that's a good question. How would they definitively know? I think anyone who's not, nihilistic will start to have some sort of value system of where they're placing value, and frankly, that can be arbitrary. I mean, the existentialists point that out. There's no inherent meaning. It's our job to place it out. But they're feeling that's part of human nature. Which we can agree or not, which we're on here, was that those are rational and moral things. And so that's virtue literally means excellence. This is how we excel as a human being, is by fostering these elements. We may disagree, that's not part of human nature, or we don't need to foster it. But that is their position, and I think it's borne out in a lot of our relationships that these are valuable qualities, like I said, in a whole range of whatever we might be doing, whether we're a soldier, teacher, child, it doesn't matter. These are beneficial. So I think it's more of a inference where we can infer it based off of all these situations rather than this top-down type of approach. I don't know if that helps.
Does that get it?
Well, that's the real stickler, isn't it? Isn't it? And because I haven't read as much, no doubt, probably as you have, or maybe even you, David, but I am somewhat familiar with the classical philosophers and the concept of excellence and pursuing that, which I'm all for, and love the virtues, but it was within a worldview that often was very hierarchical and sexist, for example, and racist for the time. So now we're beyond that mostly, and we don't ascribe to that same definition of good and bad, right and wrong. And so it really behooves us to understand why is that and how do we come to that. And that's one of the reasons I come back to humanism being this. We have to get outside of ourselves about it. We have to take in a very global perspective with everyone on the planet, gets to be part of the dialogue. And some of the philosophers like Philip Kitcher, but other evolutionary biologists and anthropologists do look at over time and see when people lived in smaller groups, they're surmising from the best knowledge they have is that it was more egalitarian than our world has become today. So those are problematic things, and as humanists, we don't always all agree about it, but again, it has to have this global picture. But to speak a little bit about human nature, humans are social. We're cooperative, but we're also competitive. And again, that's borne out by the best science that we have. The other thing that you just alluded to, Gabriel, is that we are meaning makers. We create the meaning. We create the values. We value things. We choose one way of thinking. We decide what's right and wrong. And that's in our nature to do that. And we have been doing that since we came out of the caves, I think. We are emotional beings, as you suggest. We have these instincts. Again, that thinking fast and thinking slow, reacting on our instincts, as well as the ability to be rational and use our higher order reasoning, which is what we need to do in our very large groups now in a global world. The other thing is our human nature is like, are we good or bad? Are we, are some people bad? I think humanists, naturalists would say that that's not true. What affects who we are, our capabilities, our personality, our physical and mental health are influenced by our genetic endowment and environment, often that we had nothing to do with. So we're products of circumstances that none of us chose. However, at the same time, humanists would maintain that we do have a sense of agency, and because of our higher order thinking that we have evolved to have. The other thing that I like to focus on is that we're collective learners. Again, we didn't get where we are today in this room with all our technology and all other things on our own. This has been going on, and that's, again, the part of being human. We do that. So I'll just stop there and maybe get some reaction from the Stoic.
What does that bring up anything in your thinking about to continue?
Well, I don't think the Stoics are suggesting racism or sexism or other things that were that are prevalent today as they were then as well. I don't think that would align well with any of their idea of virtue. And yeah, there's not a I know everything type of attitude either, but the collective whole can also be incorrect on a number of occasions throughout history. So that's not always the best parameter. Human agency is obviously super important, and it is to the Stoics as well. It's one of their most foundational pieces, identifying things that are in your control and out of your control. Because as the Stoic Epictetus rightfully pointed out, when we misidentify those things and associate this is in my control, and we get so frustrated when we're not able to enact that change, that misidentification causes a lot of strife. And this identifying where we have agency and where we don't is also where we can focus our attention, and also aligns with where morality is. We're not held responsible for things that have nothing to do with us. Similar to in the difference between like first degree and third degree, and for many types of crimes is, were you trying to do it? Was there intentionality involved? So agency is extremely important all throughout Stoic ethics and behavior and practices.
Audrey, why does bad things happen to good people according to those humanists?
Because we live in an undesigned universe. If anyone were an engineering student, we're supposed to create, a workable, functioning world or society or object or computer, you wouldn't want glitches in it. And that sounds like a really serious glitch. So, yeah, there's just all these forces beyond our control, including even within ourselves. Even though one of the things that I do like very much about the Stoics is a way of really sort of working on sort of one's internal self and sort of getting your own house in order. But we don't have control. The best we can do, and this is part of the humanist project, is to help create a world, a social environment where everyone can thrive. And so not as many bad things are happening to good people, or not as many people are suddenly doing bad things, or maybe not so suddenly. Like take, for example, there was an article in the Star Tribune this morning, maybe some of you saw it, about the angry young men in our society who are doing these horrible mass shootings around the country, or using violence and a lot of guns now that are so available to settle disputes and deal with whatever is going on in their lives. Are these young men bad? Are they bad by nature? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's what a humanist would say, and that's not the intent. It has so much to do with, our mental health and the social environment within which we create people to live. Why
Does bad things happen to good people?
They don't. That question has a lot wrong with it. It assumes there's good and bad people. That doesn't exist in Stoicism. You can have, if we're using good and bad in the moral sense, our choices are good and bad. The person themselves is not. I guess a person could make 100% bad choices, and you could infer they're bad, but that's not the case. The choice itself is what's good or bad. As well as nothing bad can happen in Stoicism to the individual. Good and bad, again, is our choices. Is our choice done with virtue? If it was good. And if it was done in a viceful manner, it's not. And then there could be, it's neither. It has no moral value. So bad things, A, don't happen to you ever. You can do something bad, but they don't happen to you from an external sense. And people aren't good or bad. So it's not a meaningful question based off of how good and bad are defined and looked at. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to do a cop-out answer. Mm-hmm. It's just their definitions, that sentence doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate? I really need this elaborated.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
So what do you mean when you say nothing bad happens to somebody?
Well,
Isn't that what you just said? Nothing bad can happen to anybody?
I suppose, okay, a tsunami, and you happen to be on the coast when the tsunami comes in and you drown.
That's not a moral event. Morality involves agency, choice, intentionality. There is nothing of that with a tsunami.
How would you evaluate what just happened the last couple of weeks with bad things happened to people, they got shot and injured or killed? How would you, that was agency. Somebody had some agency. We could argue how much personal agency was involved with the actions of those particular people. Mm-hmm. But that was a bad thing that happened to a whole bunch of people.
Based off of what? Weren't you the one that said morality is just this human construct, and so how's it bad then?
Well, yes, it's a human construct.
Okay.
I've constructed that as a bad thing, and I think most humanists have, and I think most people on the planet have.
But,
to get shot, an innocent person to get shot or killed, that's a bad thing. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement about that, but maybe must be Stoics disagree about it. I'm missing something here.
I don't want to get it where a Stoic's like, that didn't matter, it wasn't bad. We're talking, again, was the shooter acting out and maybe had a bad choice? That is how the Stoic would be looking at it. That, because the only thing of moral value is one's character, and the only person that can harm your character is yourself, that is why bad things cannot happen. That's, again, only in a strict moral sense. Was that not favorable for my health, for instance, to get shot? Yeah, or my life? Correct. But those health, life, those sorts of things are not where morality lies. They lie in intentional choices that one makes.
So only the individual.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So to summarize, and then we can build maybe if we need to, but so a tsunami can't be evil because it's just a natural thing. So we won't call that evil.
Correct.
We won't think Satan did that.
No.
But we definitely know that many American politicians see evil as a quantity that leaps in or whatever to a mass shooter. So that kind of quantity or free-floating evil isn't even in the imaginations of the Stoics?
No, this gets into ethics in general of how you view situations. So that, like, there's three. Can I quickly?
Please, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll be as fast as possible. So for those that haven't studied ethics, there's generally three major schools of ethics. Deontological, that's where there's set, like, this is good, this is bad. Think like the 10 Commandments. It's always right, it's always wrong. They're set prescribed things. Then there's consequentialism, which utilitarianism is a version of it, but it's the results that matter. And then you got the wishy-washy virtue ethics that the Stoics are for. It's not what is happening, it's how it's being done. It's our intentions, the underlying beliefs that of that action, of that choice, is what made it good or bad. And so if you have a consequentialist view of things, then yes, like life being lost or these other things will make more sense in a moral sense. Or if you have a prescriptive deontological murder is bad categorically, then it makes sense. There's a lot more to it when you ask in a virtue ethics sense. So it's not just, I'm not trying to dismiss these crimes as they're not crimes, or they didn't cause strife into the world or anything else, but in a strictly morally good or bad, it's bad things can't happen to you. And you can't be a bad person in general.
Right. Well, and I mean, one of the interesting things I think about contemporary humanists, I mean, we don't sit around being philosophers all the time, but I mean, we kind of ratchet between deontology, that's just wrong, and consequentialism, you know, well, that ended up badly, but it was a good idea back there. And of course, also, the greatest good for the greatest number has always played into the ideas of humanism in terms of ethics. So, I mean, it seems like we maybe just we just ping pong between rather than hanging on to something. What do you think?
Well, it's true that lots of humanists are consequentialists, at least a good part of the time. I think it's helpful, though, to say that in this undesigned universe that we live in, it didn't come with a handbook, and it didn't come with a set of instructions, and we come up with these moral theories. That's the best we're doing. And I think that there are a lot of moral theories that are helpful for us to think about, just not consequentialism. But to the point about deontology, like are there some things that are right and wrong? Yes, I do think that we are not entirely moral relativists as humanists, because we reach some kind of consensus and social norms in terms of, well, and this is that we can count on, so we don't have to always think about it so much and look at the consequences. But what again, to our goal, what we started out with is like we want to see widespread human flourishing. We want the world to work for everyone in a good way, and so it's not just about the individual, although that matters how we conduct ourselves individually. But we are very much in the big picture piece. And again, one of the things that I say a lot about us is we are responsible for constructing the world that we want to live in. And I know you would say this too, David, that we are responsible for the world that we live in. And it's not just about our individual behavior, it is about the social structures that we create, the social institutions that we create. We're not bees or ants. It's not all instinctual. We're very social beings, but we have to create systems in which we can function for the good of all.
Mm-hmm. Well, that concept of human flourishing, does that, well, I mean, it's two steps. We want to flourish ourselves as humanists. Also, we are committed to helping the widest number of other human beings and other living things to flourish. Is that in any way a part of Stoic thinking?
Some would view virtue as flourishing or harmony. That's sometimes how it's defined here. Again, it's that virtue is not something that's practiced in a vacuum. In order to practice kindness, there's usually a subject and an object here. So it is all about our interactions. And you've talked about the social nature. The Stoics certainly recognized we had a social nature. In fact, that was juxtaposed to the Epicureans as well as the Cynics, other philosophical schools, where the Cynics sort of like, we don't need any societal norms, we're just going to go around public naked and doing all sorts of depravity, if you will. The Epicureans who thought, let's just go off into our little walled garden, this world's just horrible, that's just But the Stoics were like, no, you're part of society, you need to be out there. And so there's not this retreat off into the mountains or something, and you need to get your act together first. It's you're in society, you need to make this difference. But the way the difference is done is through virtue. That is how that difference is made. Because the consequence, and why they're not consequentialist, gets back to agency. They didn't have control over the consequence. I did my piece, and then there's all these other causal chains that muck up what I do, and what I intended to happen may or may not happen. So I can't really be held responsible for that. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah. Well, no, that sometimes the comparisons break down because their human knowledge and human life has changed considerably. I mean, do you think, for example, if again, let's bring a Stoic, into our world, so that we don't have to deal with that's the way the Greeks were thinking, or something like that. Do you think that then that a Stoic would, because we do have these statements that we are the two sets of teeth, it's Marcus Aurelius, we are social animals, and these kinds of ideas. Are they then for a social flourishing that would have some kind of larger basis? I don't know if I'm asking that right, but you get the idea.
Yeah, to the ancients, that was known as politics. Right now, it's a very dirty word and has other associations, but how you interacted with others. And it wasn't retreat away. Many were very active for trying to enact this change. But they do recognize what their role in that change is, which is very limited. And there are a lot of other factors there associated. But yeah, there's certainly the greater whole is not ignored by any means, then or now.
We know that the first Humanist Manifesto said a shared life and a shared world, and they were much more democratic socialist and redistributing the wealth and that kind of thing. And we know that the two later manifestos kind of backed off of that. Where do you think humanism is nowadays on the societal flourishing, or responsibility to societal flourishing?
Is this mine making the noise? Or David?
Mine?
Okay, all right. Well, there's not a consensus, I would say, but I do think it leans toward the more progressive side. I wouldn't say democratic socialism is necessarily there. I think you'll find humanists sort of like across the spectrum. But what I would maintain, though, is that humanists see their responsibility, and not just to the leaders. I mean, again, I'm not well studied in the classic philosophers, but I seem to recall Aristotle, who also had this sense of the excellence, the virtue ethics, that then the leader was responsible, the politics, the leader was responsible for being virtuous and whatever. But it was still a world that we wouldn't recognize or most likely want to live in, because it was very hierarchical, and anyway, it's not the world we would want to live in. At least I wouldn't want to live in as a woman. But anyway, my point being, humanists today see that we have a responsibility to create the kind of society that we want to live in. And we want that kind of equality, that fairness, that social justice. I mean, I can tell you some things about how some of these things grew to be accepted across society now. But it was a long process, and lots of people participated in it, and not just leaders. They were grassroots movements. There were philosophers, including Karl Marx, who had a great influence on things that happened. So it's academics to grassroots efforts have changed our world and our understanding of what it is to have a world where everyone can flourish.
Okay. A marketplace of ideas kind of question now. We know that in the ancient world, schools of philosophy were something you signed up for or you bought into, and the philosophers were often teachers. Stoa meant they were under the red porch kind of thing, and that's where they met in the marketplace of ideas and of Athens, for that matter. And of course, then Christianity comes along and becomes this kind of dogmatic hold over Western European thinking. And now we're kind of back to a marketplace of ideas again. Is that why Stoicism is coming back? Is that it's good in the marketplace of ideas?
So I think it's making a revival, if you will, because it works for a lot of people. Like I said, the psychologists have realized a lot of the lessons work, and people want to have the good life in some way, shape, or form. And it aligns with, obviously, if your good life is all about personal wealth and fame and fortune, the Stoics didn't have the best route to that. However, that's why I feel it made a revival. It's efficacious, it works. Things that don't work, and there's a humility there where you should be testing this out. You should see if it works, and if it doesn't, well, find out something else that does. So they were always open to other ideas. The Stoics quoted other non-Stoic philosophers prodigiously, especially like Seneca did. So they weren't opposed to other ideas or this is just this closed system that's going to never change. They were always open to new ideas, and it was changing over time. And there were disagreements from the very founding. Things like physics and logic, do the gods even exist? That was a discussion from the get-go, and it didn't make the whole thing fall apart. It was a strength. In my view.
So no pope of Stoicism, and sort of the marketplace of ideas today. Then with humanism, very few people know about us. What's up with?
Yes. What's up with that? Well. I would say what's up with that is that Christianity has had such a hold on Western thinking, and religions really across the globe that have taken over, especially monotheistic religions that have taken over. And unfortunately, they're making a comeback in theocracy is making a comeback, sadly. And I think that, well, I'm sure everyone is well read in this room, so everyone probably has their favorite books and sort of favorite theory about that. But it's something that's very concerning, and especially what's concerning is Christian nationalism in this country. And so people with power and advertisers with power really, and so the people with money, they sort of control some of the messaging. And so I think it is hard to get our message out. The other thing is, I think that free thinkers aren't organized. They're not organized, and the religions of our time have had centuries to build up their power and their influence and their just awareness. You know, that's how people grow up. I mean, a lot of people sleepwalk through their religious upbringing, and then they just keep it. They don't think about it. That's why we talk so much about the examined life, and people are waking up and go like, "There's that? Oh, there's Stoicism out there. There's Buddhism out there." There are other ways of trying to get at the good life, and but I think a lot of people, there's too many people are still shunning, and they don't see that you need to build institutions. That's what humans do. The hive's not going to run on its own. We're not built that way. But we have to create it. Because other hives are being created. They're religious, they're political, or just entertainment, sports. You are identified by you thrive on your sports teams. That's where you get your high, you know. Or your music group, or the style of music. Whether you're into ska or hip hop or whatever. There's so many ways you can get sort of that satisfaction. And we as free thinkers are still sloughing off like what we're trying to leave behind as opposed to building something. And it's going to take money and it's going to take commitment. One other little story. When I was in seminary, I did go to seminary. I was going to become a Lutheran minister many decades ago, and I became an atheist instead. But I remember sitting in a sociology of religion class at Union Seminary in New York City, and it was a bunch of radical feminists sitting there arguing with our professor, ranting about the church and on and on. And she said, "You can tear down the church all you want, but unless you have something to replace it with, it will not die." Because these institutions serve a human need and a social purpose.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we can't ignore, I mean, Christianity is the elephant in the room. It stands between ancient Stoicism and whatever we have nowadays, and put a stop into so many ideas, I suppose, in doing this. But what we did do, and I think this is fascinating in the history of Christianity, is how it removes practice. It removes any kind of, aside from saying maybe reading the Bible and saying a prayer or something like that. So Stoic practices seem to be one of the central reasons that Stoicism is coming back. You want to, why? I mean, what good are those practices?
Well, the good is if assuming your values align with how the Stoics define a good life. If the good life to you is you acting morally and rationally, being free and tranquil and happy, well then, that just doesn't come out of the thin blue air. That requires a lot of hard work. So there are a lot of practices out there. There's several books on them. The Stoics wrote about them as well, but they start everywhere from the second you wake up, from morning intentions, being focused, mindful of what you're doing, being present. After all, most of our foibles are, reminiscing or regretting things that have happened or being anxious about them to happen. Seneca has a great quote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," which I think we would all agree with for the most part. But it's that constant examination throughout the day of all of your sensory data coming in. Is this accurate? And this is a time to examine my beliefs. Are they aligning? How efficacious they might be? There's reflection at the end of the day, journaling, meditation. There's a whole bunch of practices, but it requires practice. It's really, unless you were raised Stoic or Humanist or whatever it is, and you want to become that, and it's this very comprehensive worldview, you got to undo 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or more years of conditioning. And so it requires a lot of habituation. So practice is an essential part to make it happen. I'm not just going to will my happiness into existence. It's hard work over time.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on those practices, like throughout the day? I mean, is there sort of an expectation that you're meditating or writing, or what is this awareness? I mean, because I have not much familiarity with those practices, a little bit about meditation, at least as it's come through, secular Buddhism kind of thing.
Well, all of those practices, I could just say, are keeping your eye on the prize. Otherwise, if you start to go into autopilot, which you talked about on several occasions, that'll be whatever your previous conditioning was. And if your previous conditioning's working and good, then good, just go into autopilot. But so as a result, that's where, for some people, writing about it is keeping it on mind. Others reading, others, again, a morning intention, a reflection at the end of the day. This is where I've gone good, this is where I haven't, or this is where I've struggled. Again, examining all of our sensory input throughout the day. Does that sort of okay.
I think it might be time to take some questions from the floor. 'Cause I have a suspicion people want to ask more about Stoic practice, which is kind of the thing that has come back in some ways. So if you have a question, please come to the microphone so that we can all hear it. And if you want to direct it at one of us or just a general, and then I'll direct it, or however you want to do that.
Well, I'm Frank Hansen, and I'd heard that it was Enlightenment thinkers that invented the idea of progress, that if we think about governments, we can make monarchies into republics, whereas the Stoics, they lived in a world where they thought their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their descendants were all going to live in a world pretty much like they lived in. So the question is, what are modern Stoic thinkers doing to incorporate this idea of progress into Stoicism?
Okay, yes. So the question has to do with the probably, I mean, this is one of those history of ideas things, did even the idea of progress even exist in the ancient world? A lot of people think it didn't. But so let's update it. Neo-Stoicism, is there any ideas of progress within Neo-Stoicism?
Maybe I'm missing something here, because I can't think of any time where people wouldn't recognize progress getting from point A to point B. So I really don't see it any different now than then. Am I misinterpreting?
Societal progress. I mean, we think that, the arc of the universe bends toward justice. It doesn't appear that the Stoics thought that there was an arc of the universe bending toward justice.
No.
I see by your reaction that's yeah.
I would say it's very much aligned with like Gandhi's famous quote, "Be the change you want to be." That's where you have your agency, yourself. And yes, you can get involved with a group, but again, that's up to the group of where your input went and what sort of change happens. The Stoics are looking, no matter the situation, dire or utopian, I can still be living a fruitful, happy, tranquil life. So changing and going, all of your effort trying to mold the external world into what you like is not necessarily taught, as well as is really a recipe for disappointment.
I'll twist it just a little bit because we know that in U.S. history, liberal religions and liberals in general have come under great criticism because we thought that the future was bright, period, and now it's not looking as bright as it was. So where are humanists going with that idea? It's not going to be onward and upward forever, maybe, anymore. So what do you think?
I think too many humanists still think, though, that we can figure it out. Well, and especially people that are really enamored with science, that somehow we're going to work our way out of the problems. We're clever enough that we'll figure it out. And I think that is not a good perspective to take. Sort of where nihilism came from. I mean, you know, and it wasn't just in religions, although at the beginning of the 20th century, the progressive era really was kind of a humanistic era, just secularly as well. I mean, we were going to have good government, we were going to have, you know, better elections, you know, we were going to clean things up, we were going to clean up our factories, you know, all the kind of the exposés of all the horrible things, and we were going to fix it all. And then there was World War I, and then there was World War II, and you know, things didn't look so fixable anymore. And so progress, it didn't look like we were making progress. I mean, which is really an irony. Right at the turn of the 20th century, things were looking so promising. And then you had the 20th century. And now we have climate change. And so we have to be really alert. And that is why, and one of the things that I think we did not understand 100 years ago is, again, that interdependency. Knowledge was proliferating, but it was all, we didn't put it together. And we didn't understand the world like we need to. And we're still trying to figure that out. And yeah.
Yeah, well, I mentioned John Dietrich, a minister here who came up with the idea of Congregational Humanism, and toward the end of his life, he said, I was wrong about my overselling of science during my younger days. So, yeah, please.
Hi, I was wondering, in this whole presentation, something I was thinking about was time, and where virtuous actions in one period of time may not be considered virtuous much later. In other words, you may have a short period of time that you're thinking about, and those actions could be virtuous. Let's make sure we can heat everyone's home. Maybe they can't afford it, but let's find a way to do that during our time. And then 100 years later, we have global climate change occurring, and what was virtuous back then looks like a really bad idea much further on in time. So how do you integrate more long-term thinking into both of the sets of ideas that you've been talking about?
Okay, so virtue as a continuum. I mean, our fundamentalist friends think that God said it and it's always true, always. So virtue doesn't change from a fundamentalist viewpoint. So one would be, part of the question would be virtue changing over time in the ideas of what is good and what is bad. And to address that idea, and then I suppose, again, how to update virtue within, if we are changing, how do you update it? So you want to take a shot at that, or who wants to take the first shot?
I will. It doesn't need updated. It would be the Stoic position. And the reason being...
Did you say it doesn't?
Does not.
Does not need updated. Because the way virtue is being used there is not... We use virtue in a different semantic sense nowadays than they were. You can think of it more as character traits, again, how you're doing things. So I don't think we need to update and say, well, I don't think we should do things with kindness and understanding anymore. We should do it with vitriol and ignorance or something. I guess what might be considered kind could change over time. But those character traits, I feel, are always relevant no matter the time and place. That's one of the arguments the Stoics put forward, and I certainly agree with.
Any reflection on that, Audrey?
Oh, without opening a can of worms, do you mean? Yeah, I mean, I think there are long-standing virtues, from the beginning of time. However, how we put it into practice is going to change. I mean, and I will say, this is my problem with, I think there's a lot of virtue to Stoicism and other older traditions. But my problem is, when things are stuck in time, the worldview of Aristotle or something else was not my worldview. The way they treated women, the expectations they had, for certain people and even certain men could do some things, but others, there was clearly a hierarchy. You were born to be the servant class or the slave. So, and how we understood sexuality. Now that's really complicated, because how we understand sexuality, in the beginning of the 20th century was maybe more strict than it was maybe a few hundred years ago or 1,000 years ago. So anyway, it's complicated. But we have to have long-term vision, and we have to learn from history. And it gets, what I would say is really different from the early times is something, I don't know if it came out of the Enlightenment entirely or elsewhere, is the dignity and worth of every human being. That is not the case. Most people were not valued. Only certain people were valued 2,000 years ago, even 200 years ago. It's a big difference. Now when we say we want everyone to be able to flourish, we want to value people who aren't heterosexual. We want to value women. We want to value people who are not like us. That is a modern construction of human value.
Go ahead. We can always circle back. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I'm new to Stoicism and Humanism. I don't know much about them. So my question is there a defined end goal of either? So whether that means on an individual level or a societal level or concerning all conscious beings, is there an end goal to that? And if so, is there currently a clear defined path within either school of thought to reach that? Or is that something to still be figured out and discovered? And is it seen as something that is achievable?
Who wants to take a shot at that one?
Well, I don't know if you heard at the beginning, we kind of addressed that with one of our first questions. Pardon? I will. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the goal is that everyone is valued. I would say in humanism, everyone across the globe is valued, and we have created social systems where everyone can flourish.
Well, and the idea of cosmopolitanism is also an ancient Greek idea that we do universalize, right? That
Yes, but again, the point was, or I don't know if you missed the beginning or not, there is a very clear and defined goal in Stoicism, the good life, which is being a virtuous person and having, freedom, mental tranquility, and happiness. And there is a very prescribed or a number of ways to address that. But the biggest is really changing our underlying beliefs, what we focus on and what we value. Those will dictate, do you get to this path or not? And that's the case for any journey. You got to have focus. You got to want it or value it.
And when you say those things, I mean, I think those are things that humanists value as well. I mean, we don't value everything. I mean, we don't value materialism in the sense of like acquiring lots of wealth. Not that there's no humanists that acquire lots of wealth, but that's not our goal. Our goal are very similar to, the sort of contentment and, and service, that's, and creating meaning that we think is purposeful, so.
We definitely talk here in this congregation about saving the world and all sentient beings and all living things, and that's the goal. Now, I think some of us think we can get there, and some of us think there's not a heck of a lot of way we can get there at this point. But the goal, I think, has to remain in terms of humanism. We have to work toward all human flourishing, or we're not being humanist anymore, right? Because it's just a base goal, I think. So, yeah, come on, Ed, please.
Yeah, I'm going to continue in this vein of talking about societal improvement, and I want to start from the assumption, I think you kind of suggested, David, that contemporary American society, we're in bad shape. This country, not militarily, not so much economically, but politically, divisiveness, threats to democracy, socially, loss of social norms, our people look uneducated, have poor values, just seems to be a degradation of our society. And then I want to suggest a thought experiment. Let's imagine that we have a Stoic leader emerge with one of the major political parties, a new Marcus Aurelius, if you will. What kind of program would he propose? And if he were elected, what would he try and do to make this society better? And the same for humanists. If we had, I don't know what the standout humanist would be, but if we had a humanist came on the political scene and rose to the top in the way Barack Obama did, what kind of program would this person, he or she, promote, and how would they get it? How would they try to change our society?
Okay. Do you want to elect Marcus Aurelius and do it? And
well, unlike some previous politicians, or a lot, character would matter. Again, someone with, and I feel that is one of the best ways to enact change is through character, seeing people in power with integrity and kindness, and not belittling and name-calling and all this other nonsense, and having the humility that they can and are often wrong and open to new information. So what sort of laws they would enact, I don't even want to try to guess that. But it would be the approach of governance where these are our priorities, which they clearly are not now. We see duplicity, we see double standards, all sorts of things, and it's not called out because it's not valued. Just like philosophy in general is not valued. We don't have philosopher kings or presidents, and their cabinet doesn't have set people with philosophy like they did in ancient worlds. And I'm not necessarily suggesting they would do that, but it's what they value and what they feel important is. And clearly that's not the case right now. So I don't know if that addresses.
It sounds like you're saying lead by personal example.
Yes.
Which is nice. What could you do more? You could argue Barack Obama led by personal example, and how far did it go?
yeah.
we followed with Donald Trump?
Well, that's, I wouldn't say, assuming you feel Barack Obama had good character, that was a that led to Trump. I feel good character. I don't think there's a negatory impact of good character.
It didn't prevent Trump, would be my point.
No, no.
It didn't raise the level of standards of
Yeah.
politics in this country so that a Trump would be trounced. He wouldn't even get the nomination.
Well, let's see, who was the next emperor after Marcus Aurelius? It went downhill fairly fast after.
It was his son, Commodus, and who was atrocious. So, there is things, ethics committees and rules and laws that are not being practiced that helped enable this sort of behavior that later happened more than just through example. So there would be a lot of change, but I'm simply saying that would be one big part of a Stoic ruler. I'm not going to go down every issue and how would they do it. That would, I don't know. I don't know how fruitful that would be.
We could go on for a long time.
Humanist presidents.
Well,
Right.
I wouldn't mind a philosopher president, but what I'd really like is a historian. And one of the problems of society is now we're just leading by, people who have some kind of personal charisma with a certain segment of the population, or enough of us that they can get elected. And people don't, because it's been turned so ugly, politics, is we don't have good people running, historians, public intellectuals that have an understanding of the world. So that's one thing that we need, and I don't know how we're going to get it. That would be very helpful. The other thing is, I don't know if we should depend so much on one person as much as really trying to strengthen our democracy and all voices being heard. And it's not just being heard at the ballot box, but being heard just in all aspects of our civic lives. And that people feel valued across our communities. And, I don't think it's a set of policies, and we kind of have it, the Democrats go from very liberal or progressive to more centrist, and the same thing. I think again, it's too hard to answer. You'd have to go back. On some issues, for instance, those of you who know me, I'm very, very left of center. Other issues, I'm more centrist. And I think that's probably true for most people sitting in this room, that they're not, if someone were to say you're a centrist or you're a maybe I'm kind of a libertarian on some things, believe it or not, Nathan.
There you go. There you go.
Or, or I'm very socialist on other things. It's too complicated. And the only one thing I want to say is there is no perfect system. The world didn't come with a manual. We have to figure out, and it's extremely messy. And I would say, though, the humanist directive is that we get engaged and do stuff. If people with good values and virtue, which we need more of, the kind that you speak of, Gabriel, if people like that aren't stepping up and being involved, you have all kinds of unvirtuous people who are happy to be greedy and power hungry and controlling our corporations, our public life, our social media. Those of us who consider virtue at the personal level and at the public level have to step up and get involved.
We've got 3 minutes. Do we have one more question? I think you've been, please go ahead.
So I thought today's discussion was very interesting, especially similar to the previous view of people who came up on the questions of social progress. And I want to sort of take a spin on it from the angle of like moral relativism versus moral objectivism. So initially my question to Audrey was, it sounds like humanism takes a more objectivist approach to deciding what's wrong and what's right. You mentioned that, for instance, we can look to science, we could look to recent progress, and then to build a society that's better for everyone. I know that a lot of people might think of that as somewhat dogmatic. For instance, like how do you know that social equality for all is the best solution? For instance, there is an idea that the concept that everyone should be treated equally or respectably, for instance, inherently derives its roots from Christian teachings, because it's certainly not talked about as often in Eastern traditions, for instance. So is there any scientific backing to certain concepts, certain tenets of humanism? And I also have a second question for Gabriel, and that is, initially I placed sort of Stoicism on the spectrum of like moral relativism, like strict moral relativism, because as you say, like what really matters is if the individual who's practicing Stoicism is able to achieve a virtuous and fruitful life. And then sort of based on the previous question about like what would a Stoic president be like, your answer seems to be someone who holds true to their character. So would it be correct in saying that Stoicism is entirely process dependent rather than outcome dependent, and then there's really, it's completely more relativistic in that there is no one thing that could be stated as the right thing to do? And there was a mention that public education, for instance, could be one good answer for what the Stoic president could do. Would you agree with that statement? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think it boils down to what in philosophy is known as foundationalism. What is the absolute total ground floor foundation of Stoicism that you start all assumptions from, or is there one?
There is one, and it's virtue is the sole good. That's the foundation. The moral relativism piece, I think you got when I was saying, is there some like scientific grounding to definitely say this is right and wrong? No, there's not. It is a human construction. The Stoics, the ancient ones would claim otherwise, but I don't. I take the existential view of that. But it's not relative where, well, if you think this is good and there's just no good as a result, that's the starting point. That's where they're saying the good is. Obviously, we can disagree with that, but I wouldn't say they're moral relativists at all. And again, a lot of these questions with how a leader or enacting political change and so forth, it's got to remember it was not a political philosophy. It really is not one. It is a personal philosophy which can be beneficial in political realms and in other areas, but it's really about keeping your own equanimity, no matter the circumstance. It's all well and good if we can enact this change, or you're going to be good if the change happens or not. So it's, I'm not going to say it's inconsequential, but it is inconsequential to your equanimity if the society changes the way we would like or not. But it's saying we could still be have equanimity regardless of it. I don't know if that muddied things up or not.
We probably need to knock off. You have a 30-second summary.
Okay, I just want to say to this young man's question about calling me so much of an objectivist, equality for everyone. I I agree with Gabriel. We don't have a scientific foundation for that, and that can be debated. That can be debated. But I think, yes, there's differentiation in terms of people's capabilities and all kinds of things that everyone's not going to be, the outcomes of everyone in life is not going to be equal, and that there's never going to be any kind of hierarchy and roles. There is going to be some of that in society, but that everyone has dignity and worth and has, again, can at some point have some autonomy or authorship of their own life, as opposed to saying, this is your place in life. And that is the way human history is. Women, this is your place. Slaves, and they determine who's slave. This is your place. And others, I don't know how, like the aristocracy somehow, whatever. Every society had its own hierarchy that evolved. What humanists are saying, no, we all have dignity and worth, and that at some level we get to have a say, as opposed to someone else dictating to us what our place in the world will be.
That's a good place to stop. And I hope that you will hang around a little bit. The group invites us out to have some snacks. I see some wine on the table. That looks very ancient Greek to me. Thank you all for listening today, and be glad to continue the conversation. So, thank you.
All right.